Hello, friends. Welcome to the Thinning of the Veil podcast. I'm your host, Tia Smith. Super excited today. I have a dear friend, if I may call you a friend now. We actually didn't know each other before, but we have been connected with through our, I guess our we both have the same friend, Halana Leith. She actually is used to live in New Zealand and currently moved to Utah. And she was one of the ones that reached out a little while ago on the podcast. And since then, we have become fast friends in all of the ways. We're texting almost daily because we feel an urge for Ephraim and Manasseh to be able to come together and testify of these things that the generations and especially the younger generation will understand who they are and where they've come from. So that is a huge introduction, but my friend John Smith, no, we are not related. At least I don't think so. I mean, I guess we are related if we go back far enough, but John Smith, and he's actually currently in New Zealand right now. John, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and your background so that our audience can get to know you a little bit better?
Tēnā rawa te tātou mihi kawatura kia koutou e mātaki mai ana i tēnei whakapāhotanga i tēnei wā. Uh, Koia tēnei mihi ka rere atu nei ki a koe tia mō tēnei mahi au. Kia whai wāhi atu au ki tēnei hononga ipurangi kia whakapāhongia i ngā kōrero taketake ke mui tāua i tēnei wā. No reira, mihi kawatura ki a koe o tira ki a koutou katoa e mātakitaki mai ana i tēnei wā. Ko au, ko John Smith tōku ingoa, he uri tēnei no te maunga whakahihia mumukai, ko Rākai Pāka, te hapu, ko Ngāti Kahungunu te iwi. Ko tā ki tumu te waka, ko tamate ariki nui, tōna kaihautu, nā he uri ahau no taku pāpara Hiba Kurei Smith, ka moe ia i Ameriki te Edwards, ka puta ki wao ko tōku pāpā, ko John Smith, ka moe ia, ia parikura biti a koe a ko au, e noho atu nei ki a koutou i tēnei wā. No reira, mihi kōtura tēnā koutou i tēnā koutou, o te rā tēnā tātou katoa. It's a privilege for me to be part of this podcast. Thank you, Tia. We are friends, and we're probably related.
Good.
And so I'd like to think we have a much wider connection, especially when we look at that through the lens of genealogy through the House of Israel. So I'm John Smith. It's a very English name for a very brown-skinned man, but I'm a descendant of Rākai Pāka from the tribe of Ngāti Kahungunu. I also have genealogical links going back to Tūwhare Toa, to Ngāti Porou, Mātātua Waka, and also ki te whare tapu o Ngāpuhi, ki Ngāti Wai. And so, I'm privileged to be a part of this podcast with you. I currently work for the church, for the organization. I work as a multi-language supervisor for the Pacific area. So I supervise all the language teams throughout the Pacific, and it's a great work to be part of the translation and interpretation work for all the work that's spreading forth throughout the world, and particularly through the Pacific Islands. It's great for me to be a part of the Māori translation team as well, having been a part of many projects in the past, and currently now as the supervisor for the Māori translation team. It's a real privilege to be able to do this work as well as a job. But other than that, I'm a eighth generation member of the church, and so we have a family legacy, the Smith family, hailing from Luhaka, Mahia area, and so it's important for me to keep that legacy alive, and it's more so to do with my personal commitment for the things that our people have done, our ancestors have done in the past, and paving the way. And for me to be able to live up to that legacy by continuing to perpetuate, the blessings that have been handed down, and along with that, all the gifts that are associated with that. And so, yeah, I'm very privileged and I'm blessed, and once again, I'm happy to be a part of this program with you, Tia. Thank you for extending the invitation. It's very it's oh man, it's really nervous for me to. This is the first. I'm not afraid of speaking, but to be able to talk about such spiritual sacred things in this setting is yeah, it's very new for me, and it's I might be uncomfortable, but I know it's an important thing. I know that whatever experiences that I've had throughout my life and even now, that they're there for a purpose, and I'm coming to realize that. For many years, I hid those things. I kept these things to myself, and uh, hopefully, a lot of oh well, I mean, I think close family and friends that know me um, probably don't know certain aspects of who I am as well, and I think that's kind of the scary thing about it is, you know, um, it's been able to sort of project myself in a way that, yeah, a lot of people wouldn't actually see me in that light, and so yeah, as we get more into this, I'll definitely try to be more spirit led in the things that I share with you. Hopefully, that it achieves the outcomes that you want here in this podcast. So, yeah, thank you, Tia, and also me to Helena and Nat as well for opening, the way as well and being part of it. So, yeah,
Most
kia ora.
assuredly. Yeah. When I first met Halana and Tyler, um, I started to kind of do a deep dive into the Maori, and I'm still trying to figure out how to say that. Maori. See, I'm
Yeah,
still
yep,
struggling with it, but
I understand.
I've been studying nonstop for the last 3 or 4 weeks. In fact, yesterday I just tried to listen to the alphabet and the vowels and how it works. In my studying, I have found something that has been truly remarkable, and that is the teachings of your people anciently closely resembles the temple, the temple worship that we currently see now in our day. I've studied a lot of your, is it the Matakite or seers, all of their prophecies that they have been that were foretold that actually came to pass when the gospel was introduced into your nation and your people. Can you tell me from your own personal, because I've done a lot of studying, but most of the people listening probably have no idea about your culture and what in your culture generally are the teachings and the symbolisms that's helped you in your gospel living as you've been now an eighth generation member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints?
Um, yeah, I think my upbringing, I grew up in a small area outside of Hastings. It's a small place. It's probably maybe 200 to 300 people, um, uh, and there we have um, a chapel there, which serves as the stake centre for the whole region. Um, we also had prior to Church College of New Zealand, we had the first church school established there in my little village, Korongota, Bridge Pa. And that was called the Māori Agricultural College. And for many generations, and even till now, our area has been quite influential with the growth of the church. There's a lot of historical significance to that area, especially at the turn of the um, the 20th century. I think around 1884 or 1881 onwards, certain prophecies were being fulfilled in terms of the gospel being taken to Māori. Now, you could probably go back 30 years before that, maybe possibly around 1850s when the first LDS missionaries arrived on New Zealand's soil. But however, the mandate was to take the gospel to the Pākehā people, to the white people, and so Māori were not really given that privilege of having missionary work afforded to them, and I think because over time, history shows that the work was very slow. The missionaries established a few branches throughout the country, but there weren't too many conversions. So there wasn't a lot going on. But when the mandate was given by the prophet at the time to take the gospel to the Māori, that part was also in part fulfillment of prophecy prior to that call from the prophet. And our Māori prophets, who we revere as prophets, were also receiving spiritual witnesses and revelations around the coming of the church. And you would have read quite a few of those prophecies already. And so from 1881 onwards, 1884 was when I think the prophecy from Paul Tangaroa was fulfilled, that the missionaries were well on their way to making their way up to certain areas, and the gospel was on fire. The people were readily accepting of the gospel being taught to them in their language. And so there was a real boom at that time of Māori joining the church. And that also played a part in my family's role too, with joining the church. So my great-great-great-grandfather was Johann Harkin Schmidt. He was a Prussian whaler, and he arrived in Mahia, and he married a Māori woman, and they had many children. And although Johann, his name was evidently changed to John Smith, and so through his children and his wife, they joined the church, and that sort of began our family legacy from there. But going back to that as well, one of Johann's daughters was Mere, and Mere married a prominent chief named Hirini Whanga, and so they were the first Māori family to migrate from New Zealand to Zion, to Utah, as you know. And so that's an interesting story about that. Her diaries are still in possession by family members, and we really love that history, the commitment of Mere and her husband. And at the time, Hirini was a very renowned tupuna, a very renowned ancestor. He was from a chiefly line. His father was a high-ranking person, and I think when the gospel came amongst the people to them at that time, they readily knew that this was the right path for them to take, and so when they joined the church, that also committed a lot of other Māori families to join the church as well. And as you can imagine, when missionaries are coming into a village and they live amongst the people and they teach amongst the people, you convert the chief, you convert the village, and that was the case in a lot of areas too. So through one person, history sort of tells us that hundreds, in the same day would enter the waters of baptism, and those days were really, really special, really, really powerful, and it was a real must have been a real lively time for the gospel to be preached and also for the people to recognize their identity as well through the Book of Mormon and being able to correlate their history with the movements of their ancestors throughout the Pacific, going back to the original homeland. And no doubt we identify that through the Americas, through the American continent, and connecting back to Lehigh as well. And so over the years, we've been able to sort of retrace as best as we can, a lot of the genealogical links and all the things that come with it as well. So the beautiful thing about our culture is, I think, thanks to social media and TikTok and everything like that, I think a lot of people know a little bit about New Zealand, probably through the haka, and that's a worldwide sort of phenom at the moment, and it's great to see our culture portrayed that way. But that our culture is a very well, it's a beautiful culture. We have a very beautiful, poetic, classical style language, and it comes with a lot of feeling. It comes with a lot of power, and when it's used the right way, it comes with a spiritual power that only a House of Israel people can carry and convey. And so I think that my experience with being Māori and being a member of the church, I've never struggled with that. A lot of times our people find it hard to balance between um, living in the Māori world and also living the gospel. And to me, I've been able to find balance with that. And like you said, the temple is really the pinnacle of that. And as you mentioned before, and then the things that you've read up and studied as well, that's certainly true. In a church setting, you can find a lot of those close parallels with aspects of our culture being tied into, you know, um, the things that our ancestors brought that only a house of Israel people can bring. And so, yeah, I think uh, while some find it hard to have that balance in both worlds, for me, it's never been an issue. Um, and I think partly because, well, first of all, I love Heavenly Father, and I'm grateful for the atonement of Jesus Christ. I'm grateful to know Him, and I'm thankful that with the knowledge that I have that He knows me. And first and foremost, I'm a child of God, and no culture, no language, no perspective can change my mind otherwise. And then I'm a Maori, and so that's the order I put that, and so with that, then the gospel shines on its own light, and I think that what I learned through my culture and what I learned through my language and the things that I've been brought up with and the things that I know to be true, um, I can easily find the connections and tie that in. And for me, the task is, how do I teach that to my children? You know, how do I teach my children about who they are? And so, I'm grateful that my culture has given me, my identity. But really, I look to the Papaponamu, to the foundation stone of where all that comes from, and it's really through the lens of the gospel of Jesus Christ, really. Um, yeah, I mean, I can dabble in both worlds, but I keep a balance on that um,
Yeah.
because, as you know, there are things to be cautious of in that as well, and so you know, um, I try not to be too. I won't say ignorant on both sides, but I'm always open to learning. But the most important thing is, how does that correlate to my testimony, and how do I fit that into my way of thinking, into my way of seeing the world as a Māori, that I can embrace both at the same time. Because if it's true, you can do that. If it's not, then it just gets put to the side, And so that's how I basically look at things. Yeah.
I think it's so beautiful, first of all, that you're reminding all of us that when the focus is always on Jesus Christ, then the peripheral stuff will always, you can get the right lens on it, right? Because I think a lot of us come from a lot of different cultures. We say words differently, we eat different foods, there's different things that you could look at and say, well, we're different, so therefore, we can't be friends or we can't be a part of the gospel in the same way. But when it all goes back to Christ, it's this beautiful tapestry. And I'm kind of reminded of the clothing that you guys weave together. It's almost a weaving together of your culture, but of your identity in Christ. And it's been so cool for me I didn't know that, um, and I'm going to try to say this right, Hidawini and Mere were your ancestors. One of the reasons why so many people came into some of your tribe members came into the gospel was because of his prophetic abilities and his willingness to preach and testify in power of, even the directions that the missionaries would come in, that they would live among them, that they would eat, they would speak the same language. And so when the missionaries came, it was more readily recognizable because of the prophetic abilities of your ancestor. And the more that I study your culture and all really Polynesian cultures, and even further than that, Manasseh seems to have an ability to receive revelation through dreams, through visions, through prophetic pronouncements, more readily available than maybe some of us who are of the tribe of Ephraim. So tell me a little bit then about your ancestral and maybe your personal spiritual gifts that has impacted you growing up, because it seems like in this culture it is a norm, and not a something that you only talk about once in a while, but it just seems like within your culture there are certain spiritual gifts that are more evident.
Mm. Yeah, it's quite normal. It's quite the norm for us as Māori. Um, we're a very receptive people to spiritual things. Um, I've only ever known that about our people. Um, uh, I'm from the tribe of Manasseh, uh, I've been riddled with some of these gifts throughout my life. Spiritual gifts that I often don't speak about. But um, I, I think back to my grandfather. He wasn't a member of the church, but my grandfather, on my mother's father, um, was a very he was a very hard man. Um, his father fought in the war, and that came with a lot of trauma in their family, and so their upbringing was really rough. Um, I remember the home that my mother um, and my grandparents lived in. It was a very old house. It um, and it was the only house on the hill. Right next to it was a cemetery, and we also had the marae there. And so my grandmother, her religion is Ratana. It's a Māori religion, and so most of my family on my mother's side are all Ratana. My mother was raised Ratana, and I remember when I was a young kid, um, being at my grandparents' house all the time. Um, we would grow up on the marae there, and my mother was and my grandfather was the custodian of the marae. But it was always said that when someone passed away, And so before someone would pass away in the village, they would come and visit my grandfather. And the way that you could recognize that is in the house, because it's such an old house. Um, uh, you could see the holes in the walls to look outside. The house, you could just blow it and it would fall over. Um, but yeah, it was a very cold house. It was very creaky. It was very noisy. Um, you could hear the wind, the rain, and everything with it. But in every room in the house, you had those lights that, you had the cord hanging from the ceiling, and then you had the light bulb. And, it's quite scary when you're a young kid because the whole house is illuminated in darkness. And then you see light emanating from this little light bulb that just swings to and fro. And so at night times, and I witnessed this once, I was, in the bedroom, and the door was open, and it was late, and everybody was asleep, and I couldn't sleep because there was too much noise going on outside. I could hear the wind howling, I could hear things banging outside. And for a little boy, that was quite scary because you're sitting in the dark. You're with all your cousins lying in the mattress and sleeping together, but I just couldn't sleep because I could see all the shadows. And my grandfather would leave the lights on in the hallway. And while I was sitting there one night, uh, the lights in the hallway started to sway together. And as I sat there, I thought, what's blowing those lights? They don't just move on their own. And then I saw somebody walk past my door, the bedroom door, down to the hallway to go to the end bedroom where my grandfather slept. And the person that I saw was dressed in white, and they walked past the door and then um, went into the room, and then the lights went out, and I got scared, and I was just like, oh, oh. I was trying to wake my sisters up, and I was real scared and almost crying. I was shivering. I had found out later on that my grandfather would receive visitations from people, um, spiritual visits. Um, Prior to someone passing away, they would visit him. Um, and back then, they didn't have cell phones. We didn't have social media. We didn't have emails. But my grandfather knew before the whole village knew, before anybody knew that this person was going to pass through the veil. He was the first to know. And that happened all the time. And so when I heard that, my jaw dropped because I was just like, oh man, I actually saw it. And my eyes kind of opened after that. I was really, I became a lot more spiritually intuitive, um, without really knowing what that was. But I often pondered about life after death. I pondered about spiritual things that way. And the, throughout even my youth, when I was young, um, I would often find myself going to our family cemetery quite often. And I would just lay down on top of my grandfather's grave where he's buried, and I'd sleep there. I would sleep there, and I would just be thinking about my grandparents, my great grandparents, all my cousins that had passed away that are buried right here. I used to think and wonder about them a lot, and it got me thinking. While I'm lying there looking up at the sky, I'm thinking about me, and I'm thinking about a lot of the things that I had experienced as a kid that didn't make sense to me. Um, and then as I kind of got a bit older, um, I think a lot of those imaginations then started becoming reality, for me, and quite frequently. And it was like, the more I thought and pondered, and I'm sure I often prayed and dreamed about, spiritual things like this, that they started manifesting. And it probably really opened my eyes even more prior to my mission and going on my mission. And that's when it really intensified. Um, and it was crazy. Yeah. And ever since then, I've had those certain intensities, of having spiritual experiences, particularly now as an adult. Um, I I wonder if someone's picking and choosing for me, or whatnot. I mean, I don't seem to have control over that, but I've had many wonderful experiences throughout my life that I just know now. There's just no shadow of a doubt. There's absolutely no shadow of a doubt cast on my testimony about where our people are when they move through this world. And it's given me such a depth of testimony to know that, yeah, man, God's got a plan for us, and we are here for a purpose, and we do have a purpose, of um, making it back to His presence. And so, as I've grown into adulthood and matured more, and have been able to settle with a lot of things within myself about it, I'm finding it more easier now to be able to share with people. Um, because for a long time, I didn't understand why I was seeing things, why I was seeing people, and what did that have to do with me? You know, sometimes I didn't even know the person, but nevertheless, I, there's a message. There's a message, and it's taken me years to figure that out. And
Yeah.
yeah, so
I
yeah,
think
I
I
think that
think
was really the first experience I drew on, was
yeah,
the one with my grandfather, and then from there it was. But yeah, okay.
when you start having experiences at first you don't know where to place it, especially as a child. And by the way, we are friends because on vacation I go to cemeteries. So you and I can hang out together because it seems like cemeteries for you are also like a home away from home, which sounds a little bit weird, but you start to realize that the spirit world, first of all, is real. And second of all, that the gift that you've been given is for a purpose and for a reason. And it's within the context of God's wanting all of his sons and daughters to come home. That is going to require many different spiritual gifts, but especially, I believe, in relation to our ancestors, we have to have that gift, especially in your culture and tradition where a lot of it was oral, a lot of oral family histories. What I love though is as I've studied your culture is that it was important for everyone to know their genealogy, regardless of what religion they belong to, that your ancestors were always important. And I believe, and I've said this before on a different episode on my podcast, is that I believe within the Polynesian people and the native people that because your ancestors are always in front of you, you're always remembering them in different ways through your carvings, through art, your oral histories, that then you receive those spiritual gifts because they're always present. Wherein maybe some other cultures you just want to forget about who your grandparents are. You're too busy, you can't be bothered. Because I believe it's in the remembering that spiritual gifts are given. When we talk about your development of your spiritual gifts and understanding, before when we talked previously, you talked to me a little bit about your uncle. Tell me a little bit about his influence, what he did, and how that impacted your now kind of growing into these spiritual gifts and understanding.
Mm. So when I moved to Hawaii, uh, uh, well, I think I would have been 16 at the time. I remember having conversations with my uncle, and I told him about things that I had experienced throughout my life, and I'd never told anybody, not even my mum, or anybody else. And my uncle pulled me aside and he says, "You know what, son?" He goes, I know exactly what you're talking about. He said, when I was a child, I had these same gifts, and he got scared of them. He got scared of them, and he said by the age of 12 years old, he couldn't really handle it, the intensity of the things that he was saying. Um, some were good, but some weren't.
Yeah.
He had some really dark experiences too, and as he shared those with me, he shared me an experience about that, and he said to me, it got so full on that he ended up praying. He prayed it away that he wouldn't have the ability to see these things anymore. And he said, you know what? He said, my prayer was answered. And he said, and since then I've not been able to have those kind of experiences that I used to have. He spoke with a bit of regret too. And as a 16-year-old, I really took that in, and I remembered how he felt how I felt too when he said that it came with a bit of regret. And that made me ponder about, first of all, should I do the same thing? Because I'm not too sure if I can handle this, or shall I just bear it, and shall I carry on with that? And I have. There've been some times where I've wanted to say, stop, that's enough, that's enough. But I know as I've sort of pushed through, even through some darker experiences, that has brought me to the light even more. And the more you want the light, the more light you receive. And so I've been able to have, way more um, spiritually enlightening experiences than I have, with the darker ones, so to speak. But my uncle was very influential in my life. He's probably the reason why I am and where I am, in this position today. He taught me a lot. Uh, in our previous discussion, I spoke of an uncle that I used to go with into the prisons. He was a chaplain in one of the prisons, and I would have been around 18 years old at the time, and he had invited me to come along to the prisons with him. And I actually had a few friends locked up in prison at the time, so I thought, oh, let's go see them. And so we went there, and my uncle, I just didn't know he was this kind of a person, but my uncle sat down with a group of gang members. I mean, they've got gang tattoos all over their faces, and things like this, and you could tell these were real gangsters. They were leaders. They were powerful people. And incarcerated for whatever reasons. I just looked at them and thought, well, this is a waste of time. What are we doing here? My uncle just has a Book of Mormon, and I'm just like, what's that gonna do? And here I am as an 18-year-old, because that's the world I saw at the time. I was just like, my friends here that are locked up, like they're not good dudes, man. And anyway, I sat in on the first session with them, and my uncle talked about the Book of Mormon, but he talked about it that in a Māori way, and he talked about it as if it was our book. This was our history. These were our people, and he drew a lot of things out of the Book of Mormon, the things that I had never ever heard of in my life, And I, although I say I'm an eighth generation member of the church, I didn't actually grow up in the church that well. Um, I come from a broken home. My mother and father separated when I was 5 years old. My mother was a convert to the church. She was of the Ratana faith. And when she joined the church, I actually never knew that my mother was a member of the church until I was 19, until I went to the mission. And she had told me when she dropped me off at the mission training center, I had asked her, I said, Mum, why did you not ever raise me up at the church? And she says, you know, um, she goes, oh, well, son, I got baptized, not long before. And I was just like, are you a member? And she goes, yes, I am. I was just like, oh, I didn't even know, you
Wow.
know. And so, yeah, so although I never really grew up strongly in the church, came from a broken home, and I was really on my own whim, but as I as when I came back from Hawaii, and living with my uncle and family there, that changed my life. And I came back to New Zealand at 18 years old with a desire to serve a mission. And so I think my uncles back home were looking out for me because they knew the kind of life that I had. Um, they, they knew the kind of kid I was. And yet here I am coming back saying, I want to serve a mission. And that probably exceeded a lot of people's expectations at the time, even my own. But my uncle took me aside and said, "I'm going to take you to the prisons with me every week." I sat down there with these men, and to see the way that these men were being humbled through the spirit of what they were being taught by my uncle changed my whole outlook. I was just like, wow, wow. And so that's where my love for the culture really fostered, from having that experience of being able to see it relatable to the gospel and the gospel vice versa, with my culture. From then, it's just been a never ending ride for me. And so my uncle was very influential. Although I never had a solid father in the home, my uncle became my father, and I call him dad. He calls me son, and so um, I'm grateful that I had a righteous man in my life that directed me and taught me, that understood me because of who I was, and his experience as well. And yeah, it's brought me here today. So
I find it
yeah.
extraordinary when we talked about your father, or I mean your uncle, sorry, previously, and his teaching in the prisons, that what drew these quote prisoners to change was the fact that your uncle spoke about the prophets and apostles in the Book of Mormon as forefathers. And if
Mm,
you really think about that in relation to prison on the other side of the veil, it is the talk and speak about forefathers and how we're all connected that also changes hearts on that side of the veil as well. It's
mm,
extraordinary when the spirit of Elijah starts to light upon people in no matter what kind of prison they're in, the power that speaking about our forefathers and our connection to them really can emit this kind of change within them and within ourselves. Um,
right.
can you tell me a little bit now about your own thinning of the veil experiences, some of them, as it relates, especially to your work in the Gathering of Israel?
Um, yeah, I'll share with you a few different scenarios. The mission, well, we want the good ones, right? We're just speaking
Absolutely.
about them.
If we had time, I'd say all of them, but we don't have time for that. So,
Uh, so in the temple, um, I've had countless. I can't even count how many times I felt that there was no veil at all. There was no veil. There is no veil in the temple, and that took me quite a few years to get used to. Um, I remember the first time my wife recognized that I was, having an experience, and she's become quite receptive with me. Um, I guess she can tell by my body language or whatever it is. I have no idea. Um, when you're in the zone, you're in the zone, right? And I think um, being able to open up to my wife over the years and share things with her, it's really helped me. She's given me the confidence. So let me share with you the most recent one, which wasn't too long ago. Um, we were doing a ceiling. My wife and I were in the ceiling room, and there were two other couples in there, and we each had our names to do. And as my wife and I were sitting there while the ordnance work was happening, um, I closed my eyes. And the reason why I closed my eyes at the time that the work was happening was because the room was full of people, and I just didn't want that to be noticeable, and so I ended up closing my eyes, and two things happened when I did that. When I closed my eyes, I may as well have just kept them open because as I closed my eyes, there were more people, and I remember when I was seeing that, I saw this family, and it was a number of people, and they were standing there together, and they weren't even of the same nationality. They were different sizes, shapes, ages, colors, but they were all standing together as a family, and they had their arms wrapped around each other. And I remember they were so excited. They were just really, really happy. And they were standing there as if there was a curtain in front of them. And I could hear them talking, and they were saying, "Oh, we're getting ready. We're getting ready. It's about time." And then the curtain opened and the light shone on them. And it was almost as if the work had been done for them and they were now connected and they came forward together. And I'd never seen that before. And I just looked at my wife and I was just like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. And so um, the other thing, I was just like, oh man, this is a bit too much. So as I had my eyes closed, I opened them, but I just kept my eyes down because I was trying to internalize it all. And as I had my eyes, I could just see their feet, walking past. And I was like, no matter what I was trying to do to avoid or just try to keep it cool, that day in that ceiling room was a big reunion of families being joined together. I was in the temple with my son as well. It was his first time going through the temple. I actually was a second time doing. It was second time in the temple, first time doing sealings prior to him leaving for his mission, and so his mum wanted to have that experience of doing some sealings with him, and so that just having us three in there with my older son was great. But that experience on the whole of seeing the sealing work being performed, but there were others there that were connected to that sealing was just mind blowing to me. And I can still see the faces. I can still see the faces. So that wasn't too long ago, that experience. The many temple experiences I've had. I remember we had family baptisms. My wife and I try and go to the temple every month, once a month, and we take all of our children. Well, we have five children, but our youngest is eight. I have a 15-year-old, a 17-year-old, an 18-year-old, and one who just turned 20. But at the time before their missions, I have two that are serving missions right now. We would take our children to the temple at least once a month. We would book them in for temple baptisms and stuff like that. And I remember one of the sisters in our ward. She loves family genealogy. She is so connected to spiritual things. It's not funny. But my wife asked her, "Do you have any temple names to take?" And she said yes. She gave us this big stack. It was a big stack, and you're only allowed to take five names each. But she gave us a big stack of names. She said, "Oh, here, take these, get these done." So my wife said, "We'll get all these done. We won't go until they're all done." So we get to the temple. Um, we take a few nieces and nephews with us, just so we have numbers. But we booked that session out just for our family, and we're in there. And I remember I was standing in the water. I was doing baptisms for for my kids. And I remember I was standing in the font, and I had my son, And just as I was about to perform the proxy baptism, the name came up on the screen, and I saw the name, and then I stopped. And so my wife and my niece are sitting up doing the witnessing, and then I think I have someone else doing the recording, and there's only very few of us. But I stopped because I had to look up on the steps of the font, and there was one person who was just standing there, and he was just staring at me, and I just looked at him, and I couldn't take my eyes off him. And I was just like, in my head, I was like, "Who are you?" Because this man looked like an old. He didn't look like an old man, but he was a scruffy looking man. Um, he had blue eyes, he had blonde hair, he kind of had a beard, but he was rough looking. And I was just standing there looking at him, like, "Where did you just come from?" And so he was standing on the steps, but his feet were in the water. And so I looked at him, and then I looked at the name, and then I looked back at him, and I knew straight away, "This is you." And so anyway, I went to perform the baptism. And as I came up out of the water, I looked, and he just turned around and he went back. And then another person came. And then I was just like, "What?" And then I looked at that person, and then another name came up, and it was the same last name. And then he stood there with his feet in the water, standing there looking at me. And so I baptized him, you know. And then he turned around and walked back. And then another one came out. Four of them came out, one by one. And they were all siblings. And they all stood on the steps of the font. And you think that was powerful, man. We went to do the confirmations, and I could barely get a word off because I was going through all these names. There must have been about 100 names. It was a lot. But as I was going through the names, those four names came, and I couldn't handle it, because I was actually out of that whole list of names. I definitely knew those four had accepted the gospel and had accepted their baptism. And in a way, for me, it was so reassuring. This work isn't in vain. We have to do more than pay lip service to our testimonies. And so, as part of that gathering of Israel, what we're doing on this side, it does matter. And you might do 1,000 names, you know, may not, everyone may not accept the gospel, but I tell you what, there are those that are waiting on the other side that will come, that want to be there, that want to see it. And when I did the confirmations, I could hear each one of those four say to me, "Thank you." You know what? The thing is, we did the baptisms and we did the confirmation in Māori. We didn't even do it in English because every time I take my kids through the temple, or every time I go through, I don't go through in English. We go through the whole thing in Māori, in our language. And so we were doing it all in Māori, regardless of what the names were. But they each whispered to me and said, "Thank you," and that was really, really cool. Um, and it's been funerals. Funerals are a really tough thing to, or not tough, but they seem to be like at that funeral service, you know, that seems to be a thinning of the veil experience for me as well. And I've had, countless times where um, before the body would come in to the chapel, I see the person walking in front of her, in front of herself. And that is such a beautiful thing to see. That is such a beautiful thing to see. Um, Last year, uh, we were at a funeral um, of a he's a whanaunga, he's a family relation of mine. But my brother-in-law, there was his nephew, so we all went down to support him. And I remember when they carried the body out of the chapel and took him to the cemetery, there was so much people there. Huckers were going off, and everyone was doing their thing up at the gravesite, and you couldn't even see. You couldn't even see. The immediate family there. They were just all surrounded. You know, by the plot there where he was being laid, and as clear as day, I saw that person standing above his own where he was being laid, dedicating his own plot. Yeah.
Wow.
He was saying the prayer. And I was just like, man, wow, that was such I've never seen that before. Um my sister in law just had a baby, her first baby. And prior to her giving birth, this person kept coming to me. And I could see her face. I could describe her from head to toe. And it wasn't until uh when she gave birth, they were in the maternity unit, and we went to visit the next day. And then as I sat in the room, because it made me think, like, why does this person keep coming to me? Like, who is she? And so I'm keeping this mental picture of her in my mind. And then I get to the room, I open the door, and there she is. And she's standing there over the baby, looking after him. And I knew straight away, she's a relation. She's someone. And so I looked at my brother-in-law, and I says, "Hey, tell me about your grandmother or great grandmother. Like, do you have photos of them?" And he says, "Oh yeah." And I says, "Do you have a grandmother that looked like this?" Described her. And he goes, "Yeah, yeah, that's my." I think he was saying that's my mother's grandmother or something. Like, yes, 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 I know who you're talking about. I said, "Show me a photo." And then he showed me a photo of her, and I was like, "That's her." I said, "That's her." And he was just like, "What are you talking about?" I said, "She was in the room. She was in the room with you. She's been here the whole time, with baby." I says, "You got to know that your that your grandparents and your great grandparents, they really love you, and they love this baby." And so I said, she was here. She's been here the whole time looking after you guys. And so you know, when I have these kind of experiences, I don't share them with the people involved. I always sort of kept that to myself because I was just like, why me? Like, why am I seeing that? Why not them? Why aren't they having that experience? Because that's them. And so I would just keep it shut the whole time. As I started sort of opening up to my wife over the years, she was just like, "You can't do that. You can't do that. You gotta share that experience with them. You never know where they're at in their life, and they may need something like that to pull them out of the darkness." And so I took that advice, and I remember I started sharing some of that with a few people that I had experiences, with those of their loved ones beyond. And as I did that, I was really uncomfortable with that, to be honest. Um, but I just hope that it did help them. You know, I'm not much of a dreamer. I don't have a lot of dreams, but when I do have dreams, they're pretty powerful. Um, Sorry if I'm going way over.
No, you're good. I think this is an awesome conversation to have because people experience the thinning of the veil in many different ways. Whether
Yeah,
it's visionary or whether it's dreams. I can remember some of my first experiences like you had in the temple where you can actually start deciphering faces, clothing,
yeah,
words coming at the same time. And in the beginning, you're not quite sure. You're like, am I making this up? I don't, you try to put it into a space and place that's understandable. But when you think about it, it really is understandable because uh, we we are meant to help others through these gifts. And yes, people have all different kinds of gifts for sure, but for some reason, when we're thinking about these kinds of gifts, we get a little, mm, maybe we shouldn't share them, or maybe it won't help someone else, or we get all of these weird thoughts in our head. But as you're explaining all of these things, I feel the spirit when you're testifying of these things because it kind of validates my own experiences. And I think the more people that talk about these things and testify of these things makes it easier for other people. Um, Tell me a little bit about
Me a
your
little bit
dream,
about your dream.
and then maybe what have you learned from these spiritual gifts? Because we're not just given them, right, to say, oh, we're cool because we have these certain type of spiritual
Yeah,
gifts.
yeah, exactly. And I think that's part of it, with me. And I think that's a cultural thing too, is to our people, it's quite normal.
Yeah.
I'm not saying, I'm generally speaking, not everybody has that ability. But I was interviewing quickly with an elder last week. I was having an interview with him, and I recorded the interview. And he's a very gifted man as well. And he said something to me interesting. He's not a member of the church, but he said, and with his role and responsibility as an elder amongst his people, he carries a lot of weight. He carries a lot of responsibility. And so he was saying that, he feels a lot of times when he's in the zone that it, everything else is blocked out around him. He he doesn't even know there's people standing next to him. He's just so in tune with the spirit world that whatever is coming to him, that's all he sees. And so he said it's quite scary when he has to jump back, when he has to jump out of that. And then he says every single time it kind of shocks him because he doesn't realize that, there were so many people surrounding him at the time, or whatever. And he said, you know what though, John? He says, all our people have that gift. He goes, they just have to know how to get in the zone. And I said, well, how do you get in the zone? And to me, I think I know the answer here. But I said, how do you get in the zone? And he said, you have to be continually in prayer, and your prayers have to be so focused. Yeah, it has to require your whole heart and mind and strength to what you're saying. And he said, and when you're in that, you're in the zone. That's his words. And I was just like, you're so right on, man. You are so right on. you know. And so that was really interesting, that he shared with me that it's a gift that's afforded to everybody, not just a select few. But I'm sure that as we ponder more about, the way to commune with God and how we approach God, um, we're adept to having more of those kind of experiences, I guess. Um, Yeah, so going back to this one particular dream, he's a dear friend of mine, and I was his young men's president for a long time, for a couple of years, and I was hoping that he would be able to go on a mission, and so we grew close together, and then he lost his way for a bit, and then he stopped going to church for a number of years, and he was doing things on the other side, that okay. And so anyway, probably I'd say roughly 10, 12 years passed between us, and I didn't really see him too much, just living our lives and stuff like that. But I always watched him, and one night I had a dream, and I saw him and his wife, and at the time they had a son, and I saw them three dressed in white, and they were standing outside the temple as if to take a photo outside the temple, as if they had just been sealed as a family. They were standing outside, and they were smiling together, like as if they were posing for a pic. And I woke up and I was like, "Oh man, that was a weird dream," because I don't dream. Um, So I sat on that. The next night, I have the same dream, but this time I see another child in the picture. There's a girl, and then there's a boy, and then there's the two again, and they're smiling, and it's the same picture. And I'm like, oh. So I wake up that morning, and I'm like, I think I got to talk to my mate. I got to find, reach him, get to him. And so I gave him a call. I said, hey, are you home? Where do you live? And so he told me. I said, look, I got to come over. So I went over to his house. I sat down with him, and we were speaking Māori together. And I said to him, look, I have to tell you, I had a dream about you. And I said, you may not want to hear this, but I'm going to tell you anyway, because what else am I supposed to do with it? And he was just like, oh, yeah, what's your dream? And I said to him, look, I saw you standing in front of the temple with your wife and two children, a son and a daughter. At the time, they only had the son. And he was just like, oh, okay. And I said, bro, I don't just have dreams for nothing. I said, when they do come, that it's a clear message because I don't dream often. And he was like, oh, all right. And so I spent that hour with him trying to tell him, bro, stop what you're doing, man. Come back to church. Like, listen to me. Listen to me. If there's anything I can say about this, I know where this comes from. I said, but listen to me. It's not an imagination, you know. And so he took it all on. We were really good. We had a good conversation. I left, didn't hear from him for another 5 years. And so I thought, okay, never mind then. 5 years later, I'm the bishop, and it's a Sunday morning, and I'm in a council meeting. And anyway, he sits down. I'm sitting in my council meeting with all my ward council members, and we're talking. My phone rings, and I pick up my phone, and I'm like, look at it, and it's his name on the screen. I'm like, oh, gee, he's just called out of the blue. So I said, hey, look, I'm just going to go take this call. So I popped out of the office, took the call, and he says, Bishop, where are you? And I says, oh, I'm in the middle of a meeting, man. And he goes, I need you to come to the other chapel. It's about 20 minutes away. He goes, I need you to come to the chapel and meet me there. I says, when? And he goes, right now. I said, okay. So then I hopped off the phone and I told my counsellor, hey, take over, I'm off. So I ended up driving to the chapel. And when I got there, he was dressed in white and, had a suit and tie on. And we went into the bishop's office, and he got reinstated back to church. And he wanted to bring me along because of the relationship that we had had. We didn't speak about that dream, but in my head, I knew, oh, it's only a year away now, you know. And so I kept telling him, as we went on, I says, hey, man, remember that dream I had about you? Da, da, da. And he was like, oh, yeah. Well, they just had a daughter. They just had a baby girl, And anyway, a year from that date, I get an invitation to come to the temple to their sealing. And so me and my wife and children, we drive down to Hamilton to go to the temple. My son gets sick, and so I have to take him to the hospital down there. So I couldn't make it. So I ended up messaging him and said, hey, I can't come to the temple to be at your sealing. I wish I could, but I'm in hospital. And so he goes, no, that's fine. It's all good. Later on that day, all the photos showed up on Facebook, and he posted one on his profile pic. And would you believe it? The very pic that he posted was the picture that I saw in my dream almost 15 years before. Would you believe it?
Incredible. That's incredible.
Exactly the way that I saw in my dream was that picture of him, his wife, the daughter, and the son. I think the son's 17 years old now, their daughter's about 10. That was really cool. That was a gathering of Israel, story. And I thought, man, yeah.
If you
Um,
if you look at Lehi and his, because he's your ancestor, and spiritual gifts run in families through ancestry. Um, you look at his spiritual gifts with dreams and visions. What was the purpose of having those dreams and visions? It was essentially, if you boil it down to the very root of it, the gathering of Israel. It was about gathering sons and daughters, his own sons and daughters, and the rest of us to Jesus Christ. And when you think about your spiritual gifts and everyone else that has a spiritual gift, you're emulating your father, Lehi, and Nephi, for that matter, in the purpose of having these wonderful gifts is to bring people back to the Savior. And that's what I love when I'm studying these things, that sometimes we think that this isn't part of the gospel of Jesus Christ. It is all over in the scriptures. Even more recently, Joseph Smith, the church was established through these spiritual gifts. It's necessary. And as we get closer and closer to the second coming, those gifts are going to be more and more necessary, especially because we're gathering Israel. So I just love that you have shared some of these differing kinds of experiences, but it's all
Mm,
within the context of the gathering. So,
mm.
what principle have you learned more deeply about the gathering of Israel? And also, how has your testimony of the Savior grown as you have honored and served your ancestors?
Um, if I start with, I find beauty in our culture. I
Mhm.
find a lot of depth in terms of the symbols, the symbolism, and the things that our ancestors brought on the canoes. Um, that details to me how much the Lord has his hand on all of his children, and particularly with Māori. Um, and I don't mean this in a bragging way or anything like that. I think we're a quite a unique people. My feeling with being Polynesian, being Māori is we're a mighty people, and we don't even know it. We don't even know it. We don't fathom the influence of how mighty of a people we can be in the world. And our people um, are struggling. They're struggling. We have the highest rates of suicide in the world. We have a high number of incarcerated Māori, and they're filling up our prisons. And in our mental hospitals, and falling to drugs and alcohol, and everything you can name that's out there on the street. Gangs are just second families. And I look at all of that, and I think, as powerful as our people are naturally, intuitively, if we're not aligning ourselves with the right connection to the gospel, to Jesus Christ, um, we will never know. We will never know the potential that we have as a people, the tribe of Ephraim, tribe of Manasseh. And so being able to just be a part of, even in a small way, um, sharing the gospel, and talking about, my cultural beliefs or my gospel beliefs with people, I always like to remind people, of who they are. Or you're not just a Māori, you're not just a person that, just came off this waka and is sitting here. I said, man, you're a powerful person. You're a deeply powerful people, endowed with sacred gifts. And so I find that there's so much beauty in our culture that, because it's so highly symbolic, there are so many layers to that. And I want our people, in the gospel setting, to see the layers open, so that you can actually see the crux of why we have this in our culture in the first place. The purity of it. You know, and because there's so many layers to it, everyone's on different levels with how we perceive our culture. You know, um, can I just share something with you for a couple minutes?
Please, that would be awesome.
Okay, this here is you'll always hear this being said on the marae in our gathering places, where with our speakers, with our orators. And a lot of times, depending on the type of gathering it is, whether it's a funeral, a wedding, or an important occasion, you'll often see one of our elders. You'll often hear this being spoken on the marae, and he would first get up, and the first thing he would say is this: he would say, whakarongo, 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 ki te tangi e te manu e karanga nei a te tui, 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 tuia, tuia i runga, tuia i roro, tuia i roto, tuia i waho. Karongo te pō, karongo te ao. Tuia i te kāwai tangata i heke mai i Hawaii ki nui, i Hawaii ki roa, i Hawaii ki pāmamao, ki te hono, ki te wairua, ki te whaiau, ki te o marama, whānau, whānau, haramai te toki, haumi e, hui e, tāi ki e. Now, probably about 20 years ago, I was sitting with my wife's grandfather, Taoko Wihongi, and he's such a respected person, such a respected elder, and he um, holds a lot of handwritten journals from his father and his father going back. So he holds generations of journals handwritten about, gospel insights, about cultural. These journals are really, really beautiful. A lot of genealogy included in them. Well, this was in there. And so I got asking him, hey, what's your understanding of this? And so he told me word for word that in his perspective, that this is what this chant means. And it means listen, hearken, and take heed to the call of the sacred bird that calls forth. Bind, bind, let all be bound together above and below. Let all be bound together, those that are within and those that are without. And let this binding pierce through the darkness and into the light. Bind together the lineage of man who descends from Hawaii, that great place that extends to the greatest distance beyond, till we are joined by the Spirit and brought to an eternal truth and light. As it has been declared, so shall it be. Unite together, become one. It is done. And so this is typically a formal chant that's given prior to a speech. And so this is before the welcoming. This sets the tone. It sets a spiritual tone for the people that are being gathered to listen to the speaker. And so as he says, take heed of the sacred bird that calls forth, to bind, and let all be bound together, to bind the things that are above and to bind the things that are below. And so the imagery here is he's talking about a bird, and the bird is the tui bird, and this is the tui bird here. And so the tui bird is it's quite a unique bird. It's a beautiful looking bird, but it has white feathers on its chest, and the bird has a unique voice. It's you can't you can hear all the birds in the forest singing their songs, but you will straight away recognize the voice of a tui. The tui has such a unique voice that you can't mistake it, and so it has a deep throaty voice, but then it has multiple tones. It has sweet melody, high tones. It has bell tones, and then you can just hear this deep throaty tone as well. And so it has such a unique voice. But to us, the tui was a heavenly messenger, and it symbolizes that this bird is the voice of the awakening. And when it calls, everyone hears it and it gathers. And so the word tui means to bind. It means to sew together, to weave together. So when you were talking about that cloak to me earlier on, that's what you're doing. You're fatu tui tui. You're weaving, you're binding, you're sewing, things together. And so this going back to this one, it talks of a particular bird, the tui bird, the sacred tui bird, that's calling out to bind everything, to bind things in the heavens, to things on the earth, to bind people that are within to those who are without. And so that's sort of one particular, because there's two versions of this where you hear people say, depending on the type of gathering. Some people use the tui bird for this chant. The other one is the huia bird. This is a one. These are our native birds in New Zealand. And the huia bird is it's extinct now. It's probably been extinct for about 100 years. Um, Probably about 10 years, maybe 20 years ago. A huia feather went up for auction, and it was $46,000 for that one particular feather of the huia bird. So it's a very sacred bird because only people of high rank in our culture could wear the feathers of the huia. And so the huia bird to us was a symbol of power, was a symbol of authority and high rank. But the word hui means together, it means to join. And you and I are having a hui right now. We call this a hui because the hui of you and I, we're meeting together, we're gathered together. And so, going back to this chant here, you'll see that where it says in the first phrase, whakarongo, 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 it's repeated 3 times to listen, to take heed carefully to the call of the bird. That tui word would be replaced with huia. And so, hui, 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 huia ki runga, huia ki raro, huia ki roto, huia ki waho, means together, gather all things, beneath and below, and above and below, sorry. So, with the imagery of these two birds, this chant has quite a bit of depth. It speaks about two things. It speaks about a binding, and it speaks about a gathering. So, my wife's grandfather was sitting there teaching me, talking to me about this. And he says to me, "Who do you think the birds are?" And I never thought about that question. And I was like, "Oh, the birds were people?" And he said, "Think." And so, as I got to thinking about it, I was like, wait a minute, wait a minute. And then he ended up coming to April the 3rd, 1836, after the Kirtland Temple was dedicated. Moses appeared to Joseph and restored the keys of the gathering of Israel. He's the huia bird, and the other bird was prophet Elijah. He's the tui bird who restores the keys of the sealing and binding. And so the imagery of these two birds being spoken of in this chant talks about two people who hold the keys of the priesthood, one for the keys of the gathering and the other for the keys of the sealing. And I think this is a really important chant that we say as a people, and you'll hear this all the time being spoken of, being used on the marae on many occasions when if you come. And so he taught me something that day about how this chant, beautifully woven and symbolic, full of imagery, you can see the gospel of Jesus Christ in this, talking about the binding and the sealing of our people. When you come down to tuia i te kāwai tangata i heke mai i Hawaii ki nui, Hawaii ki roa, Hawaii ki pāmamao, you're talking about 3 places. Our ancestors, we believe we migrated from a great place called Hawaii. Hawaii is many places. There are many ancient homelands, but there are 3 mentioned here. Hawaii of a great distance, Hawaii roa that is beyond, and Hawaii pāmamao is beyond. One elder told me that Hawaii nui, Hawaii roa, and Hawaii pāmamao are our original homelands. They're the places that are prepared for us when we pass through the veil. The other degrees of glory, Hawaii pāmamao being the furthest, the highest up. And so, our ancestors and our people could see things and interpret things in many different ways. And so it is with this simple chant and the language and the depth that goes behind that. And we're really just scratching the surface on this, but I thought I would just share that with you because what you're doing with your podcast and everything like that, and what we're all doing collectively is really just this is it really. You're seeing that in our culture, in the language of our people. And so yeah, we're the tui birds, we're the huia birds. We've been called together, we've been called to bind, and so that's the work that we do as a people. And so, keep
Mm.
weaving, sis. You're
I
on.
I feel so honored. You don't know this, but I've always wanted to be a part of a hui tau. And so when you said we are actually having a hui right now, that actually meant a lot to me. And as I've studied, and I'm just like barely just dipping my toes in it, I haven't had a lot of weeks behind it. But the more that I study your culture in particular, and it widens the net to Pacific Islanders, but for some reason, and I don't know why, um, I am drawn to the the Maori culture and your teachings because I think you what you just said, it's layered in so many different ways, but it points us to the gospel and even more so to the temple. Your culture for generations has pointed to a certain place and space, and when you have eyes to see and again keep Christ that focus, it is amazing to me what I'm learning. And that's just like you said, this is just the tip of the iceberg. I'm hoping that at some future point, you'll come back and maybe do another video that can help us know and understand a little bit more about your culture and how it points to the gospel. Um, because I feel like Halana and I have talked a lot about this, that Ephraim and Manasseh are brothers. And we've kept so separated from each other for such a long period of time. We don't know about each other. I mean, we don't even know about our own cultures, let alone someone else's culture. But when you talk about Ephraim and Manasseh and the power of them coming together within their identity as brothers, but even further as the gatherers and preparers of the last days of the second coming, your testimony from the other side of the world and teaching of your culture makes a difference to me as an Ephraimite to understanding that we don't need to be separated in the ites anymore, right?
Yeah.
It's this coming together as referenced in that beautiful language. It's coming together as one uh,
Mm,
in preparation for Zion. So,
mm,
I'm feeling a draw to this, and Halana and I have talked a lot about it. You have, fortunately for us, gotten involved in this broader conversation. My guests that are watching know that there is some movement behind the scenes um, with these dear, sorry, these dear new brothers and sisters that I have gained. And they promised they'd adopt me, by the way. But these these awesome brothers and sisters that I'm learning so much from, and our end goal really is to teach and preach to understand that cultural identity generally points us to Christ in more ways than we can understand, and it's teaching the youth about who they are. Because as you've alluded to, we've kind of all lost sight of that. So we can't really speak to what's happening maybe at a later future time when we know a little bit better what's happening. Um, but I am so grateful that you came on and that you were willing to share your sacred experiences. I know that it can be difficult sometimes, but I feel like there's going to be a lot of people who resonate with your testimony and your teaching. So I'm just thank you so much for coming on. Is there anything else you want to add before we end it?
well, I just want to thank you as well. Yeah, I went through and saw, was looking at your channel, and I saw the caliber of people that you had on there, and I was just like, oh man, what am I doing here? You've had some really, really awesome people on your podcast, and speaking of similar experiences and whatnot, and all the things that all the research you put into it. Yeah, and so I probably waffled on a lot throughout this thing, but uh, Shane, my dear mate, him and I are looking at doing presentations specifically around House of Israel migrations to Māori people, and so we're these are the kind of things that we're very passionate about, and you know no one's an expert on their own culture. We've got a lot to learn. and as we continue to grow, we um, it's not our testimonies that we're afraid of. It's um, sometimes for me, it's just having the confidence, to be able to do that in a humble way. And so, yeah, thank you for giving me the opportunity to do that. I don't take that lightly because this is the first time I've put myself out there, And so, um, yeah, thank you, Tia, for hearing me and accepting the things that I've said today. And I hope that it does sort of help anybody really that are watching, who might be in the same sort of predicament that I have been in. I'm 45 years old now, and I'm kind of thinking, man, years have gone by so fast, and I don't even write these things down. And so it's for me, it's just like, man, how am I gonna be accountable to this one day? And so I've got some repenting to do because so many times I've ignored the promptings. So many times I've ignored the signs because of my own inadequacies, and I can no longer do that. And so here I am wanting to help gather Israel in my own way. And if this is the way that I can help, then so be it. I just want to be able to leave this life and, get to the other side and see those people and say, man, I got you. I had your back. You know, I had your back. I didn't let you down. And so that's sort of where I'm at with that. Yeah.
Well, thank you. I feel honored that this is kind of your breakout session, and hopefully there's more to come. But I just know that you're doing good things behind the scenes. And like I said, I feel like this is just the start of many experiences together. And I am going to come to New Zealand. It's on my bucket list. Everyone knows that. I'm trying to learn the language.
There
And
might be a hui toe next year.
you what?
There might be a hui toe next year. There's one scheduled for next year
Really?
that was
Okay.
that's planned for 2027. So we'll see how that goes.
That'll be fun. I deeply appreciate your willingness to share also not only your experiences but your cultural kind of teachings and how that relates to the gathering, because I believe within all cultures we can see the evidences of that woven within even everyday life. So, my friends, I hope you've enjoyed John's testimony. I know I have been spiritually fed. Um, I hope that one day I can also face my ancestors and say I had your back, because that will happen at some point, I know. And for me, that keeps me up at night, knowing that I will be held accountable. I will be meeting them face to face, accounting for my actions. So, all of us, as we're involved in a gathering, let's think of that end result and act accordingly when we have that final meeting with them and with our Savior Jesus Christ. So, thank you, John, for joining me tomorrow. And you're going to have to help me. Um, I'm going to tell the story of the prophecy of Peora Te. What's the last name?
Paora te pōtangaroa.
Okay, see, that's the part that, that I'm still working on that. But it's a huge, it was one of the, I would say, forefront prophecies about the members or the elders of the church coming and meeting with the Maori people. So that will be on tomorrow, and then we will hear a talk from Elder Matthew Cowley on Friday. And then the next week, we're going to be talking about Ephraim and Manasseh, kind of a continuation of this discussion. So, my friend John, hopefully we'll have you on again. And you're always more than welcome. And someday we are going to meet person to person, face to face. And this is all thanks to our friend Halana. So, my friends, join me for the rest of the week and keep gathering, keep praying for those spiritual gifts, knowing that the Lord will bless you with revelation as you seek for it. We'll talk to you soon, friends. Bye.